Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Unlimited Power TCG, and today we're doing something we haven't done for a little while. We're going to bring you a deck tech. Yeah, woo! Deck tech for deck I've been playing for the last few months, a couple of months now, since the launch of Set 4 Jump to Lightspeed, which is Luke 4 or Luke Skywalker JTL, the Pilot Luke, and Tarkintown. So we got a double aggression heroism deck here, and the reason why I'm showcasing it is because it is fun, it's enjoyable, it's got a lot of interactions, it's got a lot of ways things play out in the game, things you've got to think about, ways to plan things. I recently went 4-1 with it at a store showdown locally, 22 players, which I was pretty happy with. I mean, it's obviously not a meta buster, otherwise maybe more people would be on it, maybe not, who knows. But yeah, so I wanted to go through it and show you all how it all works, what it's put together with, and what the deal is. So in this video we're going to cover the joys of the overall deck list. We're going to look at the leader and the base. We're going to look at the key event cards that make this deck work. We're going to look at the turn 1 plays followed by the turn 2 plays, and then the rest of the cards not covered by everything else. We're going to take a look at the sideboard. We're going to look at key combos you want to be looking at playing using the cards at your disposal, and then we're going to take a look at other cards that I have either considered and junked or am still under consideration to maybe include later or as the meta shifts, who knows, and see how that goes. So yeah, that's what we're in for. Let's get into it. So here's the deck list. Look over there, it's another Death Star. This will be shared as a link in the video description below if you want to get it on SWU and examine it to your heart's content. If you want to look at it in more detail, you can pause it or come back to any given point. So I'm not going to linger over this too much because we're about to go through all the various cards in quite some substantial detail. So first up, we're talking about the leader and the base. The leader is Luke Skywalker, hero of Yavin. He deploys on 6. He starts off as a leader whom, as an action with no cost, if you attacked with a fighter unit this phase, deal 1 damage to a unit. No restrictions, just shoot them for damage to ping off a shield, do a bit of damage to them so you can then Tarkintown them, whatever you want to do. It's a useful dirtle action if you want to, and it's generally a very powerful ping which finds an awful lot of use. It deploys on 6 either as a 5/6 to the ground or as a pilot who, crucially, cannot be defeated by enemy card abilities, which means you can't confiscate him. You can't use anything that defeats upgrades to defeat Luke Skywalker deployed as a pilot, which makes him very safe to use in that regard, because once he's been deployed on a ship, you can't fell the dragon him because it's a non-leader unit. You can't no glory only results. You can't waylay him because he's a leader unit. You could Rivals Full, that could work. If you got his hit points low enough, you could take down. If there were no other units, you could power the dark side. But that heavily restricts the methods that your opponent has to deal with what will be at that point a very powerful unit, you with +4 to attack and +5 to its health. And when it is attached to a ship, the ship gains the ability on attack. You may deal 3 damage to a unit. So when you attack, you're doing the ship's damage +4 attack, and on attack you shoot something else for 3 damage. So he's pinging and clearing things as he goes, is Luke. And Tarkintown is the sole reason, well, it's not the sole reason, it's the biggest reason why this is a double red deck, because the idea there is that on turn 2 you attack with a fighter, you ping something with Luke, it's damaged, you then deal 3 damage to a damaged non-leader unit, clear the board of what your opponent's been played, or hopefully their most dangerous unit, and can make going into the rest of the game with a substantial advantage in terms of board control. That is the goal that we have in mind here. So we're obviously building up to the 6 resource turn where we flip Luke and make some massive impact on the game. And tools by which we get there and do this are the key event cards around which this deck is built. Key events are 4 of them. The biggest and most prominent, most powerful event in the deck list, is Hot Shot Maneuver there in the bottom right, a 1-cost tactic event that says choose a friendly unit. For each of its on-attack abilities, deal 2 damage to a different enemy unit. Then you get to attack with the unit that you've chosen. So, if it hasn't got any on-attack abilities, it's a bit of a waste of a card, really. But if they do, then you get to shoot an enemy unit of your choice, assuming it's got 1 on-attack ability, for 2 damage. Then you attack, which could be into the unit itself, or it could be into the base, and it's just putting out more damage across the board to other units as you go, and as you're attacking into base, which will then stack because you will have hopefully attacked with a fighter, because, spoiler alert, this deck is heavy on fighters. Who'd have thunk? And then you ping it with Luke, and then you've got Tarkintown left, you can Tarkintown it. There's a lot of damage building up here. Stay on target is another critical and key event here. You attack with a vehicle unit. This deck is heavy on vehicles. Again, shocker. For this attack, the vehicle gets +2 attack. So you're getting a +2 attack pump for a cost of 2 resources, which is... it's not the most efficient thing out there. With Surprise Strike with yellow, you get +3 attack for a cost of 2. But what you do get as well is when this unit deals damage to a base, draw a card. And that's for the duration of the attack. So let's say you've got something with an on-attack trigger that damages the base, and the unit itself damages the base. You've damaged the base twice during the course of that attack. Therefore, if you're doing it correctly, or doing it optimally perhaps, you're drawing 2 cards and attacking for +2 attack for 2 resources, which is pretty tasty. And card advantage is insanely useful, as many people will know. But also because this deck likes to play a lot of low-cost units when it can. So drawing extra cards is a massive advantage and help in getting back some of that versatility and choice in what you get to go into the later game with. Croy Grand Turn, again, as we've already covered, there's a lot of fighters in this deck, so readying a fighter with 6 or less power for cost of 3 resources is just crazy, especially when you've got a bunch of fighters with 1 or 2 power, and then Luke deploys and has 4 power on top of that. Then that can be 6 or less than 8 power. The fighter might have raid on it as well to boost its actual attacking power further, whilst keeping its printed power 6 or lower, which is great. And then you hit him again, which is great, because if you're doing it with the ship with Luke on, as I mentioned a moment earlier, you're doing the attack twice, but you're also doing the on-attack triggers twice, which is great. And then you could be doing that with Hotshot Maneuver or Stay on Target. It all stacks in. Aggression is just an insanely powerful card. It's a wonderful reason to be playing double red, and it's the only double red card in this deck. And for that, you get the versatility of a bunch of aggro hate. You get to shoot any unit for 4 damage. Doesn't matter if it's a leader, doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter what state it's in, 4 damage. So it's open fire, which is 3 resources worth of power. Ready a unit with 3 or less power, there's quite a few of those in this deck. So very, very handy and useful. Especially when you, say on the 6 resource turn, you attack with a fighter, your opponent thinks, oh no, he's attacked with all his fighters, he's got nothing left to do to deploy his Luke onto. You can then play aggression to ready the cheap unit, deploy your Luke onto it, and then attack. So yeah, that's a nice little play you can do. And drawing a card, because drawing a card is always a good fallback to have. Because as we covered, we're going to be playing a lot, or hopefully playing a lot of low-cost units and go wide rather than go tall in this deck. So that is very helpful in making up that card disadvantage. Moving on, your turn 1 plays in this deck, as written, are the following 6 cards that I have consideration for playing on turn 1. Crackshot V-Wing is kind of a backup. Daring Raid is not really a backup, but it's obviously not a first choice necessarily, but it could help with clearing the board state if you manage to whiff on these. I do play, I think it's like 3 of each of these in a deck, so that's 15 turn 1 plays. Daring Raid can help do 1 damage to something even though you haven't attacked with a fighter yet, and therefore aren't able to use the Luke ping on the leader, and then finish it off with Tarkintown to, again, get a bit of board clearance going. So a crack shot and a Daring Raid, even though you're only leaving a 2-1 on the board from the crack shot, clearing their turn 1 play is quite worthwhile, and that could potentially be worth up to 5 damage on that unit if you manage to get a crack shot and a daring raid in your hand to do so. Grey Squadron, Red Squadron, and Black One are in this because they have on-attack abilities. Grey Squadron is not the most optimally statted or most powerful card, but its on-attack is useful, and the on-attack has synergies with Hotshot Maneuver, as I mentioned earlier. And Green Squadron A-Wing isn't here because it's essentially a 3-3 for 3 on the attack. It's really good, and when you deploy Luke onto it, it's a 5-3 raid 2. So it's not 5-3, a 5-8? Yeah, 5-8, raid 2, so that's tasty. Yeah, so those are your choices for turn 1 plays. Your Grey Squadron and your Red Squadron Y-Wings do double duty with their on-attack abilities, also potentially doing damage to base, which helps with the Stay on Target event, as mentioned. And Black One is 2-3's okay. There is no Poe Dameron in this deck, so that's kind of irrelevant factor for including this card in the deck or not. But there are a couple of upgrades that can be used to make it essentially a 3-3 with the upgrade, so it can see use in that. And it having an on attack is great for being able to be used with Hotshot Maneuver. Turn 2 plays. Once you've played that, these are the units that we can play at 3 resources. Red 5 is great for more on attack, doing damage to an already damaged unit, which you can have done either with a Luke ping or with Hotshot Maneuver to have shot something before you're doing the attack with Red 5, which could potentially do 4 damage to a unit as well as the 3 damage that it's attacking with, which is great. Red 3 has been a staple since set 1. It pretty much does what it says on the tin. It is also one of the more effective cards for putting Luke on because it becomes a 6-8 with Luke with Raid 1. Makes it very hard to remove, and it is then under the equal to or under the 6 power threshold for using Choreographed Turn on it. Speed's Masterpiece is... it sees a lot more use in decks with green, because then you get to use it with experience tokens. But in this with the red is nice. Extra damage is always nice. Extra damage to ping is always nice, because then that helps you to use your Tarkintown on damaged units, or use red 5 on attack ability on damaged units. Or you can deal damage to base twice over the course of an attack, using the actual attack power it has, or the ping on attack, where from having a red unit already in play, which is very useful in terms of stay on target. So you got a lot of synergy and cross versatility here with what things can do and how they all feed into each other. Other things to consider playing on turn 2 would be a 1 or 2 cost ship and one of these events and or upgrades. Big's Darklighter I like because it is just so efficient for its power cost. You're paying 1 to play it as a pilot. I mean, you could play it as a ground unit, 3 for 3-4. I'm sure there might be some situations in which you might want to do that. I never have in all the time I've been playing this deck, so that's not to say I never would, but I haven't yet. But for 1 cost, you attach a pilot to a fighter, and it gets +2 attack, +1 health, and overwhelm for 1 resource. It's mental. I mean, it's brilliant. It's great. It's risky, because obviously putting upgrades on a unit render it susceptible to being tapped down or subject to removal, and then you've lost a lot of resources in the space of 1 removal card, but that's always a risky play, and some decks just don't do it, so when it is very useful. And putting Biggs on Black 1 is a pretty good combo, frankly, because then your Black 1 becomes 5-4 overwhelm. Yeah, cool, we'll have some of that. Daring Raid we already covered, mentioned is good as a cost of 1, stay on target for a cost of 2, so you could play that on turn 2 alongside a Crackshot V-Wing. Hopefully you've already got a fighter in place so the Crackshot V-Wing doesn't take 1 damage from its when played ability. Or the Hotshot Maneuver, you could play that and play a 2 cost ship on turn 2, developing the board, doing some damage to other units, pinging things, clearing things, doing damage to the base, all this sort of jazz. This is kind of where we're going with this. So overall, this is the suite of units and cards that you've kind of got to play with on top of the cards that we just looked at for the turn 1 plays for going into turn 3. Consider everything that you want to do, what you'll be able to attack in terms of when you make your resourcing decisions, and what you want to be able to play with and use, building in redundancy for all the usual stuff people might do to you, like Spark of Rebellion or any other such hand messing aroundy type stuff. The rest of the cards not yet mentioned in the deck are 4 of them. Cassian Andor is kind of a must-play in my opinion for any red heroism deck. He's so versatile. Playing a 3/5 on turn 3 is always a great backup against something like Quinlan Tarkintown or Cad Bane or whatever, because they can ping for 1 and then do 3 with Tarkintown, which is total of 4 and is therefore not enough to kill Cassian. Or you can smuggle him for 5 resources and he comes in ready, and that is a really great play to do at the end of the game. Or almost the end of the game, where you want to just do 3 more damage to base to finish it off and clinch the games. I have not done that often while playing this deck, because I tend to either win handily or lose handily. But it has won games, and it will always win games, and for that it's worth an inclusion in my mind. Orbiting K-Wing I've put in primarily because, as a overwhelmingly spaced deck, this deck will be massively susceptible to space sentinels like Bright Hope, which is very popular, and Concord Dawn Interceptor, which is very popular, and the corresponding villain equivalents these days. So that's in there for that reason. I don't often play it, but when I do, it is crucial and critical, which is a great thing, and it's also the same reason why Infiltrator's skill is in this deck. Well, there's only 2 in the main deck and a 3rd in the sideboard, because having the Saboteur is really, really good. There are other options to gain Saboteur, and I can go into them in the considerations later, but I chose to go with Infiltrator's skill because I decided and figured that going with the +1/+1 as a permanent buff was probably worth more than just doing it on a temporary basis. That might have been a mistake. Who knows? It's worked out okay-ish for me so far. Desperado Freighter is in there as a stat stick on the 5 resource turn. Again, I don't play it often, but when I do play it, it's because action economies become important, and I want a big unit in order to be able to hit things with. I could deploy Luke onto it if I want to, although he wouldn't gain his on-attack ability, because that is only when you attack with a fighter. But it being 5 attack does mean it is available to have Choreogrand turn used upon it, because that will work on this. It is a transport, so you could attack for 5, Choreogrand turn Desperado Freighter, and do it again. So that's fairly tasty. An Infiltrator skill I just mentioned. So those are the rest of the cards making up the deck. The sideboard is a 3rd copy of Infiltrator skill for when my opponent decides to go all in on Sentinels, as they might well do. Disabling Fang Fighter. Sometimes your opponent plays a lot of upgrades, or you want to be able to have more certain upgrade removal than just the aggression card, because you really need to make sure that when your opponent plays Chewie on a spaceship, or Darksaber on the Sabine, or whatever else, you're able to remove it when you want to, so that is critical. And I chose to go with Disabling Fang Fighter because developing board space is important, and it's a fighter, which is helpful, so it synergizes with all the rest of the stuff going on. So yeah, that's why Disabling Fang Fighter's in there. In that, Cham Syndulla is for anti-ramp and Han decks, because obviously when they ramp or when they have more resources than you put Cham in place, and having a 5/4 on ground is very threatening. Han only has 6 hit points, so all it takes is 1 hit from Cham and a ping from a Luke, and Han's dead, so that's great. Or if you're facing a 7 health leader like Piet or any of the other ones that you might face, the 5 damage from Cham plus 2 from a hotshot maneuver or something along those lines, or red 5 on attack would work very well indeed. Wolf's inclusion in here is one that I've changed into recently with the upswing of decks like Ray, Data Vault, and other healing based decks that could try and run a long game and get you out. So I think Wolf is probably a very worthwhile inclusion on that, even if you just play it on the 6 resource turn when your opponent has flipped Ray and you play it right then and there to deny their healing that turn. That can be very, very powerful and could swing the game in the amount of damage, the amount of healing it saves you from having to face taking. And then they've got to prioritise removing him and killing him instead of doing anything else or damaging base directly. So that's good and very, very useful. I did consider the playing the out of aspect villain spacecraft that prevents healing while it's on the board, but the out of aspectness kind of turned me off, and the fact that if they just kill it midway through the turn, its healing prevention turns off when it leaves the board, whereas with Wolf, you've played it, can't be healed for the rest of that phase regardless. So that's very useful in that. Key combos, things that you want to think about lining up with the cards that you get dealt and resourced as the game goes along. One of the big blowout combos you can do is on the Luke deploy turn. If you put him on red 5, then that is a 7 attack, 9 health unit that has 2 on attack abilities. One of them deals 2 damage to an already damaged unit. One of them deals 3 damage to a unit. You can do them in reverse order. So you use the on-attack trigger on Luke to deal 3 damage to a unit. You then do the on-attack trigger on Red 5 to do 2 damage to a unit. Yes, 5 damage to a unit right there. If you use that in conjunction with Hotshot Maneuver, then because it has 2 on-attack abilities at that point, you get to shoot 2 different units for 2, then 2 each. Then you attack with red 5 for 7 to base, presumably, or another unit. Then shoot a unit for 3. Then shoot a damaged unit for 2. So stacking that up, that's what? That's 9 damage to a unit or units, and 7 to base. Brilliant. Great. Loved it. Other combos you want to be looking at, things you can use with Hotshot Maneuver. These are the 5 ships in the deck with on-attack triggers. So if you have one of those on the board already, you might want to consider using the Hotshot Maneuver and using that to put some damage onto another unit on the board, possibly in the ground arena, while you're putting some damage on base, thus clearing your opponent's board state whilst continuing to aggro to base, essentially. That's very, very useful, as I hope you can visualise and see. Another combo you can use is Stay on Target. These are the 3 units in the deck that work best with that. The Grey Squadron, whether your opponent chooses to put the damage to base or not, depends on whether they control a unit. If they don't, they have to put it to base. If they do, they could choose to put it to the unit, unless they want to keep that unit, in which case that's up to them. Same sort of deal with the indirect damage on Red Squadron, but Speed's Masterpiece is the only one of these where you can just choose to do it to the base, and is therefore the most reliable way of drawing 2 cards using Stay on Target, because any unit in the game that you can use Stay on Target with will be able to draw 1 card, assuming that you can attack base with it and you're not blocked with some kind of a Sentinel. So that is worth bearing in mind for drawing 2 cards with Stay on Target and attacking with +2. Now we get to doing the most damage possible with Luke Skywalker over the course of 1 6 resource turn. If you have equipped him onto either Red 3 or the Green Squadron A-Wing, then you will be attacking for, 7, 8 to base? No, that's not right. 2 plus 4 is 6, plus raid 1. Yeah, so 7 to base, plus the on-attack trigger, and then you can use Choreogrand turn to ready it, and go again for another 7 to base, which is wonderful, because it will have 6 or less power due to the fact it's only got 2 or 1 plus the 4 that Luke gives them. Then, because it's a 6 resource turn and there are 2 Choreogrand turns in the deck, you ready him and go again. Then you ready him and go again. So that's 21 damage to the base over the space of 1 turn, which is a lot of damage. That's quite a chunk of damage. But it is also not the most damage you can do with Luke. It is the most damage you can do with Luke in this deck, but there is a way you can get a little bit more out of him, and that is by using the Green Squadron A-Wing in particular, with Luke Skywalker alongside the R2-D2 unit or pilot upgrade from Jump to Light Speed, where you can play for 0 and you can play it with an extra pilot. So that would make you have 4 from Luke, plus 1 for R2 is 5, plus 1 for Green Squadron A-Wing is 6, plus Raid 2 is 8 damage. Then you ready it with the first Choreogrand turn, swing for another 8, then you ready it with a second Goy Grand turn, swing for another 8 for 24 damage over the space of 1 turn. R2 is not in this deck for reasons, which is mainly I dislike going to upgrade heavy because I dislike going too tall. I prefer going wide. I think it makes my battle plan a lot more reliable than going tall, although there are decks against which going tall is more useful. However, I feel that putting R2 in and going in towards that isn't necessarily a step too far, but there's also cards I would rather include instead to add versatility in other directions and other areas, like adding another unit with the 4 cost Orbiting K-Wing or the 5 cost Desperado Freighter rather than a 0 cost upgrade to an existing ship. I figured that was worth more benefit long term. I might be wrong, it's entirely possible, but that's a decision that I made, and that is what is in the deck as it is right now. So yeah, that is the big damage to face combo that you could do. I've highlighted this here because Black One is in the deck, as I mentioned earlier. There is no Poe Dameron, so you're not really getting any use out of the on attack, except for the fact that it has one to trigger Hot Shot Maneuver event with. But these are the 2 upgrades, as well as Luke Skywalker, that you could play on it in order to give it +1/+0, as well as a stat bonus from the upgrade itself. And each of them cost 1 to deploy onto the fighter, so that is well worth bearing in mind to just get a beefy unit on potentially turn 2 and attack with it for 4 or 5 damage. Yeah, which is always quite nice, as any speed player will know. Cards that I've considered for inclusion in the deck. This is fairly long. There's a few pages of this. For a cause, I've left out because the ratio of heroism to non-heroism cards in this deck is something like 40% non-heroism, so I didn't believe it worthwhile enough to include, especially when we've got the Cassian card in there, which is a guaranteed 3 damage if you play it. Oh, granted it costs 5, but it does also come out your resource row for a little bit of card advantage in there, so that is why there is no cause I believe in this deck. Chaos of War has potential in here for longer games, especially against hard control or the Bosk decks where they want to just do loads of bounties and draw loads of cards and wait to get to the long game. But that is a very niche use, which is why it's not in here, although it is in consideration for the deck. Bombing Run isn't in here for the same reason I didn't put Bloodsport in, really. And that reason is the deck's pretty good at keeping on top of most units here and there, so they don't tend to build up a lot of unit advantage or units on the board in order to make things like Bombing Run or Bloodsport points efficient. You might deal 3 damage to 2 units or 2 damage to 2 units. It's very rarely 3 in my experience, although it does happen, but that unreliability is why I've chosen not to include Bombing Run and Bloodsport in the deck. Caught in the Crossfire is a very useful red card that isn't quite removal, but can be removal under the right circumstances. But the fact it has to be under the right circumstances means it's not reliable enough for me for inclusion in the deck. Bold Resistance is one I looked really, really hard at including. 3 units that share the same trait. There's a lot of vehicles in this deck. They're all vehicles, basically, except for the couple of potential ground units. Speaking of ground units, you always have the potential to not deploy Luke onto the spaceship. Of course, you can just deploy him onto the ground for 5 damage if you fear that your opponent is holding something you can counter him, be it a no good to me dead, waiting for you to put Luke on that spaceship, or maybe a rival's fall in their hand. You can just attack with all your spaceships. Your opponent, if they're canny, might figure you've got a way of readying those ships, or you might not. And then after you've attacked with all your ships, you just put Luke on the ground. And then they can either do something to him or not, and they've been saving this big counter ready to deal with a massive Luke Voltron monster, and instead they've got 2 units to deal with instead. And most of them have attacked already. So that's always worth a consideration. Bold Resistance. I didn't find it worthwhile enough because I don't think I often had 3 ready units on the board that I wasn't already in what I felt was a compelling position anyway. So I figured that Bold Resistance wasn't as solid and useful a card to include in this deck as the other ones that are included instead. Attack run, I'm still very, very much considering. Being able to attack with 2 space units. Being able to attack with 2 units is amazing, as anyone who's ever played Rebel Assault will tell you. Granted, that one also gets a attack bonus for doing so, thanks to its restriction of being only played on Rebel units, and also being a green card. But this one, maybe I'll include it, maybe I won't. It could be useful. It would be useful in an aggro race situation. But again, it's just edging out in terms of power budget and usefulness of other cards, so maybe that'll get included. Excuse me. Anakin's Interceptor was in a previous version of this deck, but I removed it to include a Crackshot V-Wing as a 1-cost ship, because I wanted the 1 cost, mainly so that I could have some redundancy against the Quinlan and not have it certain they would be able to play a 2-drop on turn 1 to match my 2-drop, and then Quinlan ping it and then Tarkintown it out of existence. Playing a 1-drop makes that a lot less likely. Plus also having a 1-cost spaceship adds versatility and being able to round out your curve throughout the game, so Anakin's Interceptor was dumped for that reason. It doesn't have an on-attack trigger, although in the late game it's useful when it is a 4-3 for 2. Maybe I'll include it again later, but for now, Anakin's Interceptor is out. Fleet Lieutenant and Medal Ceremony are on the chopping block alongside Wing Leader, who's in here maybe a bit later or something along those lines. Did I miss Wing Leader? No, he'll be in there later. I did try a version of this deck using the Rebel package, using Wing Leader and Fleet Lieutenant and Medal Ceremony, and it was powerful, but it wasn't as powerful as just going full fighter and ignoring the ground arena as much as possible, so that is why that got chopped. Masashi Tactical Officer, I really want to be able to make that work, because just having a free +2/+0 pump on demand is always going to be useful. He's hard to remove with 4 hit points. 1 cost, he's cheap, but he's also a ground unit, so he can be attacked by anything they put on the ground that they want to just clear him off with, which there's going to be very little competition for what's on the ground from me. Maybe I should include him, maybe I should give him a try one day, maybe just swap out the Crackshot and put the Masashi in. I don't know. Do some testing games, see how it works out. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. Keep Fighting is one of the effects on aggression, which is why it's not been included. I've already got that on tap from excuse me, from Koi Grand Turn and from Aggression, which is why Keep Fighting is not in here, although it is obviously in consideration for another Ready the Unit card, of which it is very useful and powerful and flexible, but I just think I've got enough of what I've got with enough flexibility for readying units, so I don't need another one. Hunting Aggressor I considered, because having a 3/6 to be able to play on the 4 resource turn is useful. He'd be a big bulky body that I could largely count on staying alive to be able to put Luke on when he deploys on 6. This deck doesn't do a lot of indirect damage, but it does do some, and one of the cards I had considered for inclusion, you'll see later, is the Tactical Heavy Bomber, which does more indirect damage. But ultimately I chose not to include it in favour of the Orbiting K-Wing, because that was a fighter and had Saboteur, which I felt I needed more than the considerations for putting the Hunting Aggressor in. Grenade Strike does some damage to stuff, which I can then clean up with Tarkintown and Luke pings, has potential use, but again, is it as much use as I need with the damage, incidental damage that I'm getting from Hot Shot and all the things on the other units and the Luke ping? I didn't feel I needed that on top of anything else. Frisk I hadn't considered at all until I saw a video by the Nordic Takedown, who interviewed a chap called Jonas, won the 800 player Lille event using Sabine Data Vault, and he included Frisk, and he went through his reason for including Frisk, and they were very good. The reasons primarily, he's a 3 attack ground unit, 3/2 for 2 cost, which is fine. Yeah, great. I'm probably not going to use it for that purpose, but it's nice as backup. But for 2 cost, +2/+2 is good. He's less points, budget efficient than Biggs is, but having +2/+2 rather than +2/+1, the extra point of health on a unit is not nothing and can be very useful on occasions just to survive that one extra point of damage longer. And defeating an upgrade that costs 2 or less is occasionally very useful if they've got a shielded unit, or just to get rid of an experience, or to get rid of a bounty. The flexibility there is nice, so Frisk is very much under consideration for maybe swapping out Biggs in favour of. But for now, I haven't done that yet. That's something I need to put some testing into to decide if I want to do that or not long term. Poe Dameron. Poe Dameron is a beefcake. Poe Dameron is a staple in so many red heroism decks, but is not in this one. Maybe he should be in this one. Maybe he should be the 5-cost unit that I play and replace the Desperado Freighter with, which is a 5/6. This is a 6/6 with some amazing on-attack abilities. And because it has on-attack abilities, you can actually use Hot Shot Maneuver in conjunction with Poe Dameron on the ground, which is tasty. But I chose to stay focused on space, which is why Poe got the elbow in this case. Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe I should try it without and maybe go a bit more ground focus, but I feel diluting the heavy space focus in favour of just chucking a unit on the ground is not really where I want to go, because going all in on space can win games, ultimately, just by that simple heavy skew. Open fire is useful, but it is another aspect of what the aggression card does, which is why it is not in this deck, alongside all of the other incidental damage that is popped out by the on-attack triggers and hotshot maneuvers that this deck can do. Tactical Heavy Bomber was in the first iteration of this deck and was in consideration alongside Senatorial Corvette. Senatorial Corvette would have been included for the same reasons that Orbital K-Wing are, because it's a saboteur, and the when defeated effect is useful against the opposing deck. However, the reason why I chose not to go with Senatorial Corvette is because it cannot be readied with Choreogrand turn. So the benefits I do get from it are kind of outweighed by the negative synergies with everything else that's in the deck, so I chose not to go with Senatorial Corvette. Tactical Heavy Bomber is interesting because if you deploy Luke onto it, or any other attack buff, then you double dip on the attack buff damage. The 3 attack gets buffed by, if it's Luke, +4. So if you attacked with it, it would do 7 damage to whatever it hit, which is assuming base. And then the on-attack trigger kicks in, and the indirect damage is equal to its unit's power. So that'd be 7 indirect damage. 7 to base plus 7 indirect damage is not nothing. And you're probably going to be damaging base at that point, so you're drawing a card from it, which is great. That was a tasty combo that I really, really liked, but I found in testing that I very rarely played it because my opponents at that point in the game often had a lot of big booty units to soak up a lot of indirect damage, and I figured I would rather just play a cheaper unit and an event or two on the way up there in order to maintain board control or draw some more cards or whatever. So I very rarely use Tactical Heavy Bomber in the end of it, which is why it got shunted aside in favour of the Desperado Freighter, really. So yeah, that's the thing. Spec Force Soldier is a way to get rid of Sentinels. It's in consideration here as anti-Sentinel tech in replacement of Infiltrator Skill. The other thing that is in consideration for that is Precision Fire here on this page, which is an event for a single use. The thing I'm using it for isn't a trooper, so there's power budget on this card, on Precision Fire, that I would not be making use of, which is an argument against its inclusion. And Spec Force Soldier is a ground unit, which is a 2/2 for 1, which is good stats. And the losing Sentinel for this phase is a very useful ability, especially for 1. But again, it's a ground unit, and I wanted to stay all with that in space focus, which is why in the end I chose to go for Infiltrator Skill over Spec Force Soldier or Precision Fire. Relentless Fire Spray is a very powerful unit, double red. I included this in my first draft in the deck, and again I wound up never using it because you play it on your 6 resource turn. It's a threat that needs answering, sure, but you've either won the game or you've lost the game on that turn, because you've either deployed Luke and you've hit with him and you've done so much damage to base that your opponent can't recover, or you've deployed your Luke and your opponent has killed it, or no good to be dead, and they've pulled so much tempo that you can't make it back. That being able to play multiple events or other tricks or small units on the 6 resource turn was far more useful to me than playing a big unit on the 6 resource turn that I'm not going to be able to do anything with until the turn after, because there's no way I can ready it, but then on the following turn it can attack twice. It just didn't really work or gel, and I wanted to be doing more on the Luke flip turn, so Relentless Fire Spray excuse me, got cut. R2D2 got cut for reasons that I mentioned earlier, largely because it was hard to justify including the 0 cost pilot upgrade for the benefits that I got on top of everything else that is included in this deck. He's not nothing, he's very powerful, but I already went over those reasons, so I'm not really going to go over them too heavily again. Come on, next page. No, that's the wrong key, that won't do it. Wing Leader in the bottom left falls into the Rebel package that I mentioned earlier as so the reasons why I didn't include it. Tantive 4 is solidly under consideration for inclusion in the sideboard should games start going longer and longer, or I were to face more and more decks that do Super Laser Blasts and board clears, because you're essentially playing 2 units for 7 resources, and they both synergize with all the space stuff that's going on as a vehicle. And the X-Wing token is a fighter, which is handy. So yeah, maybe I'm putting Tantive in my deck or my sideboard long term, but for now he's not in there. Valiant Assault Ship was under consideration for inclusion either in the 4 resource spot that Orbiting K-Wing currently takes, or the Cham Syndulla spot that he currently takes because of its anti-ramp attack bonus that it gets. However, Cham I just found was far too useful in doing so against the decks that do ramp and the decks that do against a hard one deck, basically. That I chose not to include the Valiant Assault Ship. Although it is worth noting that its +2 attack bonus isn't a permanently active bonus, it is an on-attack one, so it does synergize with Hotshot Maneuver. Which is worth bearing in mind. Twin Pod Cloud Car was under consideration as one of the very few restore cards possible in here. In an aggro race, restore is very useful, so that I considered including Twin Pod Cloud Car in the deck, but a 2-2-1-3, even that it is restore 2, is just too easy to remove, so that was rejected for inclusion. Trench Run is a high risk, high reward card. The reward is very high, attacking with +4, but the risk is too high because you've got no idea what the spread of difference and damage is going to be in your opponent's deck, and most of the ships and units that I'm playing in this game, in this deck, are not high hit point units. There are a lot of weenie ones, so Trench Run, I believe, is too risky for inclusion, because if the unit dies when you play the Trench Run, then they don't get to attack and get the benefit of their +4 attack. So yeah, no, we're not doing that one. Tech is a solid heroism card that can see use in literally any deck, and even any villain deck to be played off aspect in order to gain access to the resource row in the late game. So maybe Tech can be included should games start going longer with this deck, but really they kind of haven't. They're either, as I mentioned earlier, either won or over by the 6 resource turn. They hate that ship. I kind of wasn't hot on it at first because I don't play a lot of really expensive cards, but I am considering it more and more because there's a subtle disadvantage your opponent gets from having 2 TIE fighters, and that is, in order to use them they need to spend extra actions, which means you're more likely to get the initiative. And 2 damage from the 2 TIE fighters isn't loads, and you can just clear them with the various pings that you've got over time, and then you've got a vehicle out with some cheated resources, which is nice. There's resources that you've gotten for free. So I am considering they hate that ship and including it in this deck, but I'm also not sure what I'd drop for it, because everything that's in the deck is kind of critically key and part of the package as it is anyway. So I don't know. Thoughts on a postcard? Yeah, if there are any cards that you think could be included in this, or that should be included that I haven't mentioned, please put in the comments. Please let me know. Please tell me what you think. This is very much a work in progress. This is not a meta-dominating deck yet, maybe ever, but it's great fun. All the moving parts interact in a really engaging and fun manner. The surprise value is always good, which may not be much of a surprise if loads of people watch this. I have no idea how many people watch this or not. Fighting with spaceships is fun. You get to play a spaceship. You get to go spaceship every time you play a spaceship. If you've ever watched the Lego Movie, Star Wars is all about the space battles for me. It's not all about the space battles, but it's a lot about the space battles. Right from the Battle of Yavin with the X-wings and the Y-wings attacking the Death Star, or in the final battle for Endor. All that stuff, the spaceships and the fighters. And the combats is a large part of what's kept me drawn to Star Wars, and this going heavily into that is it feeds that part of why I love Star Wars, which is nice. It's got the speed and play of an aggro deck, so games are either over or won relatively quickly, which means you get a break between rounds in a competitive environment, which I find very, very valuable. And the incidental controls and pings and damage that you've got to keep control of your opponent's board state, or at least keep on top of it to keep them down, make it engaging and interactive enough that it is, I find it really, really fun and satisfying to play. And I hope you might too. A couple of people that I know and have met through Star Wars Unlimited here in the UK have said that they're interested by this and intrigued and think it looks very, very fun to play, which is why I'm recording and filming this. If you're watching this, I hope you enjoy it. If you give it a try, let me know how it turns out in the comments below, and all the other engagement YouTubey stuff, likey, subscribey things. Yep, you know the drill. Thanks for your time. We'll be back with some more deck techs as and when the inspiration comes to me for doing so. There'll be some events coming up soon. Then again, maybe this will have a longevity of a video, so I'm not going to mention too much stuff that is time sensitive. In which case, I'll just say thanks for watching. Have a good one. Cheers.